I drove a food truck for several years. I have never been the type of person who stays in one place or keeps the same job for too long. My life has always been a collection of different roles, all done with one purpose in mind: to earn enough money to travel the world and see places I had only dreamed about. After working for a while at a small restaurant in my quiet hometown, I began to feel trapped. The same streets, the same faces, and the same routines were slowly suffocating my spirit. I wanted to leave. I wanted the open roads, the unpredictable destinations, the feeling of movement. It was around that time that an old school friend of mine, Anna, told me she had been hired as a full-time chef in a resort in Nevada. I remembered she owned a dessert truck, painted bright yellow with a cheerful logo. Without wasting a second, I asked her if she would consider renting it to me. I expected negotiations, perhaps a high rent I could barely afford, but to my surprise she smiled and said, "Take it. I do not need it anymore." She handed me the keys without asking for a single penny. I stood there in shock, holding a new opportunity in my hands. With a rush of enthusiasm and an entrepreneurial mindset, I turned that dessert truck into my new livelihood. I had never realized how naturally I gravitated toward the food business until that moment. I began traveling from town to town across the state of Arizona, selling cold treats to people of all ages. Over time, I used my own savings to renovate the truck, giving it a fresher look, installing better storage, and adding a loud yet cheerful chime that would call out to anyone nearby. Most afternoons, I parked near parks, playgrounds, and schools, where children's laughter filled the air. The best part of the job was the joy on their faces. Tiny hands held up their money, voices overlapped as they called out their orders, and the entire scene felt alive. Within a month, I began to recognize the regulars. I could remember every little face, every favorite flavor, and even the way some of them spoke. It was in the middle of a sweltering summer afternoon, during a school holiday, that something unusual began. Expecting the children to arrive at the park earlier than usual, I drove there ahead of time. I parked the truck under a wide, shady tree near the sidewalk and rang the bell that signaled my arrival. As expected, children came running, laughing, and pointing at the treats they wanted. I was busy serving them, my hands moving quickly from freezer to counter, when my eyes caught sight of something out of place. On a weathered wooden bench a short distance away sat a boy. His head was lowered, and he seemed entirely removed from the joyful chaos around him. In the midst of a park full of energetic children, he was utterly still. I found it strange that I had not noticed him before, especially since I had become familiar with so many of the park's regular visitors. Every other child approached me for ice cream, yet this boy never even glanced in my direction. I assumed he might not have any money, so I decided to offer him a chocolate cone for free. I turned to prepare it, but when I looked back, the bench was empty. He had vanished as if he had never been there at all. A strange disappointment settled over me, but I brushed it off and began cleaning up my counter, preparing to move to another spot. I was sweeping the floor of the truck when a faint tapping came from the small serving window. Turning around, I saw him standing there. His head remained bowed, the fading sunlight casting deeper shadows under the tree where I had parked. I could not see his face clearly. In as cheerful a voice as I could manage, I asked if he wanted ice cream. Without raising his head, he lifted his small hands toward me and said in a soft voice, "Strawberry, please." His fingers were smeared with dirt, and beneath his nails there was mud so packed it looked as though he had been digging in the earth moments earlier. I handed him the cone and told him it was on the house, but he did not move away. He continued to stand there, holding out a crumpled dollar. The air around him felt strangely still, as though the sounds of the park had dulled for a moment. His stillness was unnatural for a child. I took the money gently, and as he turned to leave, I asked for his name. Without looking back, he answered, "My mother told me never to talk to strangers. I need to go home. She is waiting for me." He walked away with the same slow, quiet steps. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, thinking how rare it was to see a child so obedient. That night, however, his image kept returning to my mind. Something about his voice, his posture, the way he seemed apart from everything around him, it unsettled me. The next day, I decided to return to the park to see if I could learn more about him. The afternoon passed with the usual crowd of children, but I kept scanning the park for his figure. By the time I began packing up, I had almost given up hope of seeing him again. Then, as I was placing tubs into the freezer, I nearly jumped. Resting on the counter was a small, dirt-streaked hand, the fingernails cracked and jagged. It was him again. "You startled me," I said, my voice mixed with relief and surprise. He stood just as before, head lowered, holding out a dollar bill. This time I said, "We are not strangers anymore. You can tell me your name." "I am Samuel," he replied in that same flat, emotionless tone. "Well, Samuel, do you come here by yourself?" I asked. He nodded slowly. I prepared a strawberry cone for him and reached to take the dollar from his hand. As my fingers brushed his, one of his dirty nails loosened and came away entirely, revealing raw red flesh beneath. "Oh no, you are hurt," I said, alarmed. "You need help." But he did not respond. He simply turned and began walking away as though he felt no pain at all. A few drops of blood dotted the counter where he had been. My curiosity now overpowered my hesitation. I stepped out of the truck and began following him from a distance. The sun had set, and the far side of the park was swallowed in darkness, thick with weeds and overgrown bushes. Samuel stopped at an enormous old tree that stood at the very edge of the park. The dim light from a street lamp across the road barely reached that corner, but it was enough for me to see him kneel down and begin digging into the soil with his bare hands. His small fingers clawed at the earth, opening fresh cuts where old ones had barely begun to heal. Blood mixed with the dirt, but he did not pause, did not flinch. I was about to rush forward to stop him when he placed the ice cream cone into the shallow hole he had made and began covering it with soil again. I could no longer hold back. I stepped out from behind the bushes and shouted, "What are you doing? Are you all right?" Slowly, he lifted his head for the first time. A cold wave passed through me, even in the warm summer air. His face was pale, his expression twisted with something between sadness and pain, and where his eyes should have been were only dark, hollow sockets. "I want to go home," he said in a voice that made my stomach tighten, "but no matter how much I dig to come out, I always end up here." Before I could move or speak, his small form began to fade. In a heartbeat, he was gone. My knees gave way, and I sank to the ground, my breath shallow, my mind unable to process what I had just seen. Somehow, I made it back home that night, though I cannot remember the journey. The following day, when I returned to the park, I found the area sealed off with yellow police tape. Several officers stood nearby, and a small crowd had gathered to watch. I asked a man in the crowd what had happened. "They found the missing boy from last month," he said grimly. "Someone buried him under that tree." He explained that an elderly man walking his dog that morning had been pulled toward the base of the old tree. The dog began digging furiously, and within minutes, a small human hand emerged from the soil. The police had been called immediately. I looked toward the scene and saw paramedics carrying away a small body wrapped in a white sheet. From beneath the covering, I could see the boy's clothing, exactly what Samuel had been wearing. His eyes were gone, the officer said later, likely consumed by insects over time. The investigation revealed that his babysitter had abducted him, hoping for ransom money. When the boy's parents threatened to involve the police, she panicked. She strangled him, but he only lost consciousness. Believing him dead, she buried him under that tree. When he woke, he tried to claw his way out, breaking his nails, tearing his skin, but the soil pressed down on him, and he suffocated before anyone could find him. In that moment, I understood the meaning of his haunting words, "No matter how much I dig to come out, I always end up here." His soul had been trapped in that park for weeks, reliving his final moments over and over again. I hope he has finally found peace. As for the woman who did this, I hope she spends the rest of her life rotting in prison, haunted by the memory of what she did.